Yeah, so as a brief intro to Dr. Robertson Ward, I can't mute them on their end. So Dr. Robertson Ward, also known as the Redox Doc, he's an acclaimed community medical physician and researcher. He was awarded a medical degree from the University of Illinois, and at the University of Cincinnati, he was recognised as the Family Practice Resident of the Year. He has served in top-level positions as family practitioner and in hospitals all over Midwestern United States. Dr. Ward has directed over 15 full clinical research studies on a broad range of topics, and he has an intense interest in helping people find real solutions to their health problems. As an acknowledged expert in the field, Dr. Ward finds positive and tangible human physical transformations as he applies the science of redox biochemistry to clinical challenges in his functional medicine clinic. And this is a book that Dr. Rob Ward has authored. It's called Healthy Cells, Healthy Life, Balancing Redox for Better Health. So thank you so much, Dr. Ward. We'll hand the time over to you.
Well, thanks very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
We can.
Good.
No technology issues in Salt Lake City tonight.
Right. I'm going to try and open up my screen here, but it doesn't seem to be cooperating. Let me try again. No. Bart, we did this earlier today. Let's see here. There we go.
There we go.
Okay, very good. So I'm excited about spending a little time sharing some science with you, and it's a fun thing to do for me, and I hope I don't put you to sleep. But being that it's about 10 o'clock here, you might lose me. I don't know. So let's just dive in. Redox science has to do with the biochemistry of little tiny molecules that are produced in every cell in our body. And they're produced, as I'll talk about later, in our cells in a certain manner, and they're critical to every physiological reaction that we have in our body. And that is true for other animals and plants. So it's a broad-ranging science, and it's a fairly new field. However, truly, it is riddled with well over 160,000 studies on redox science in all kinds of journals and articles that you'll find. And so it's really not a esoteric sort of world of science. In fact, there's textbooks and all kinds of wonderful things that you can wrap your mind around to if you're so inclined. Even Dr. Watson, who was the Nobel Prize winner for unraveling the shape of our DNA, has embarked on amazing theories that he's developing about where redox biochemistry plays into a myriad of health challenges from diabetes to cancer. And so we're all fighting challenges pertaining to oxidative stress in our physiology. And we deal with these things as best we can at a cellular level, but maintaining homeostasis depends on a balance of these molecules. And not always can our cells do that. So chronic inflammation or oxidative stress can ensue, and many health conditions from Alzheimer's disease to Parkinson's disease to celiac disease have their roots in breakdown in redox chemistry at a cellular level. And so, as this article points out, many major human disorders depend on redox regulations, and it is quite likely that a group of substances and the next generation of therapeutics will be coming revolving around this science because it's at the core of our biology. So I'd like to suggest that, as this little Huffington Post made a point, there are 5 emerging technologies in science that will probably shape our lives in years to come. And these 5 include redox signaling technology. So it's not, even though it may not be part of your vocabulary, or maybe it's a part of your distant vocabulary from college biochemistry, this science has been emerging right underneath our nose. So tonight I'd like to talk a little bit about our cells and the way they react And I'm going to use this an acronym to help us develop this concept. And so in order for our cells to have proper biology and to survive and thrive and do their work, they have to adapt and change at all times. So I'd like to talk about our cellular anatomy, mechanisms of adaptation, some redox science basics, and some practical solutions as well. So let's run through cell anatomy. Those health professionals tonight that are watching this will know much of this, but it's a rather interesting analogy. So we've got a cell membrane that maintains our fluid balances and things of that sort. The nucleus of the cell directs the cell action, and it helps to protect the DNA, critical to cell life. The endoplasmic reticulum kind of wraps around the nucleus, and it's involved in detoxification and other metabolic functions. The mitochondria in our cell anatomy are the powerhouse. They run cellular respiration, as it's called, and it is where energy is manufactured from food. Our vacuoles prepare waste for excretion into the outside world or inside of the cell, as the case may be. Lysosomes break down nutrients to smaller components so that the cell can use them. The Golgi apparatus distributes cellular byproducts throughout the cell. So it is true, if you've ever wondered where the expression comes from, if your cells are healthy, so are you. Well, this is where it's at. Our cell anatomy is actually very analogous to our human anatomy. And so this is where that old phrase comes from. So the cell membrane is equivalent to the work of our kidney. The nucleus is like our brain. The endoplasmic reticulum is functioning very much like our liver. The mitochondria work like our lung. The vacuole is like our colon. The lysosomes our stomach. And the Golgi apparatus represents blood vessels that distribute vital nutrients and oxygen throughout the body. So given that, let's talk about how our cells work and how they adapt to the world. And we'll kind of walk our way through this in an acronym called REACT. So R represents rest or recovery, and the nucleus and the mitochondria are involved in this. So our cells require rest to allow for repair. It is during our sleep that hormones and other biorhythms orchestrate a course of events that allow for everything from repolarization of our brain cells to smoothing out our surfaces of our joints in our and cartilage of our joints. The central nervous system is a wonderful example of this. So our brain cells, astrocytes, are very sophisticated, but they're terribly slow at repair work if anybody's had nerve damage. So the other problem is that our brain cells are very sensitive to toxic exposures. So to compensate, the brain has extra antioxidants and a lot of blood flow. The brain consumes 20% of our oxygen, but only represents about 2% of our body weight. So during sleep, our brain cells repolarize. They literally restore the electrical balance that they need. And the membrane of the cells are critical in this process. Another example of recovery and how that all kind of plays out is our muscle cells. They are loaded with mitochondria for a purpose. Those mitochondria help repair and accelerate the energy production and an assistance with detoxification of a muscle cell as well. Joint cartilage, I mentioned earlier, oxidation and inflammation are directly linked to redox balance. If we lose the balance, we lose the ability to do this delicate balance of repair. So joint repair from wear and tear requires redox molecules to be present in balance. So let's talk about those little mitochondria for a second, the powerhouse. Mitochondria are critical in activating the process of repairs, and they produce redox molecules during the natural process of the Krebs cycle, or the manufacturing of ATP energy. So food is considered converted into ATP, and redox molecules are a critical part of this cycle, and they are produced right there in normal cases. So redox molecules are primarily comprised of about 4 atoms: hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and chloride. So redox molecules are combinations of these atoms in 2 or 4 molecule sizes. So it could be 2 atoms or 4 atoms or 3 atoms, for example. So redox molecules are critical. They're molecular activators of every chemical reaction in our cells. They're right at the core of activating these chemical reactions from A to Z. They're also, secondarily, a primary mode of cellular communication inside and between cells. So they activate chemical reactions and they provide avenues of communication. So there are two categories of actions of redox molecules. They activate the efficiency of antioxidant molecules like glutathione. So they're stopping oxidative stress and block what we like to call cellular rust. The other main category of action is that they facilitate cellular communication. So they balance our tendency to have inflammatory problems, and that is a big deal. Without them, we will die within minutes. If we didn't have any redox molecules, we would hardly survive for very few minutes. So here's the big problem. As we live and age, the mitochondria in our bodies decline in number and capacity. We lose roughly 10% of our mitochondrial density per decade of our life. And we also lose about 10% of the efficiency of the work of these little mitochondria powerhouses. So what are we going to do about it? It's a problem. And it's interesting that most all of our health problems align according to these two categories of actions of redox molecules, not by coincidence. So if we look at human health or lack of health, on one side we have problems that are directly linked to oxidative stress or cellular rust, where there's a buildup of toxins and the cell can't correct this. And as a result, the body has to try and adapt in some way, and we see an expression of disease, from heart disease to osteoarthritis, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, etc. On the other side of the equation is problems related to inflammatory issues or inflammation. And in this case, we see problems such as allergy, asthma, thyroid problems, autoimmune issues, cancer, and such. So we've got two sides of the equation. And of course, there are situations where we have a bit of a mixture. But typically, people tend to have a tendency to have more rust on one side or more inflammation on the other as they live their lives. So RE, E stands for eat or nutrition. And our vacuoles and endoplasmic reticulum and cell membrane are big time involved in our ability to assimilate nutrients. So we've got to take in nutrients as well as ample amounts of water to maintain our health. The kidney is designed to conserve or release water according to our needs. And our stomach not only absorbs water, but also secretes digestive enzymes and acids to help in the assimilation of nutrients. And the lysosomes, like our cell stomach, are critical in breaking down nutrients into smaller little particles for us to absorb. So the food we eat each day not only provides basic calories, but the nutrients in our foods themselves are like information for our cells and the bacteria that live within our gut. So we've begun to know that inside our small intestine is an entire ecosystem of bacteria called the microbiome or microbiota. And so bacterial populations are normally diverse, like a rainforest. There's all kinds of species. But when we eat a diet that is more of a stress diet or a survival diet, where we're eating starch and wheat and sugar to maintain life, we create a shift into a more narrow and less abundant culture of bacteria. And those particular bacteria then will code for the expression of certain genes that lead to weight gain, inflammation, and certain amounts of stress. So that inflammation will, for example, limit the absorption of some key nutrients like vitamin D. It's no wonder that we have an epidemic of vitamin D in industrialized countries today, America in particular. So these survival bacteria create chemicals called cytokines, and that causes inflammation in the gut wall. And that leads to a breakdown in some of the cells, and that causes a secretion or transmission of these cytokine chemicals right to the lymph nodes, right next to our gut wall. About 80% of our immune system lives right there next to the small intestine and colon. And it's not by coincidence. It's to help us, our bodies, understand what's going on in the outside world. So when we have about 80% of our foods coming from near the ground, vegetables and fruits, and 20% from everything else, we tend to have a better balance of nutrients. Now, what's fascinating is redox molecules are very instrumental in helping certain bacterial cultures that are very good for us to grow. And probiotics are also helpful there as well. So hydration is quite critical for our health, and we want to have trace minerals and some salts in our water to help with the assimilation of water. 2 or 3 liters of water a day for an adult is appropriate, or half our body weight in ounces. And adequate hydration eliminates conditions like hypertension and asthma. I've witnessed just good hydration liberating people from these problems. So A is for action, R-E-A, and action requires our membranes of our cells, our mitochondria, and the Golgi apparatus. In our lives, movement is the best sign that there is life. And when we have movement, well, we're kind of built this way. We're built to forage and move about, just like our cells get more information when they move about. And they're aware of threats when they're able to do surveillance around the tissues. And it's through movements that cells create opportunities to know more about what they need because of the communication process that can exist between cells through the presence of redox molecules. The nucleus in the cell gets new information from this movement, and that helps it adapt genetically. Oxygen's better assimilated in cells that are moving about. And likewise, waste, is eliminated through homeostasis. So redox molecules are critical in this step. The doorway in our cells to allow nutrients in and waste products out are literally hinged or lubricated in redox molecules. And redox molecules allow the nucleus to guide and direct the genetic expressions of many physiological reactions. So it's through feedback that these molecules provide through communication from one cell to the other or within cells that is absolutely fascinating. So the question is, how do we optimize our redox potential in our cells? Exercise is a big deal. It actually does improve that. So engaging in aerobic activities where you're literally sucking wind and having a hard time breathing is so good for us. And supplementing our body with balanced redox molecules will assist in our redox potential from an aerobic standpoint. Cleansing is critical for our cells. We've got to have cells be able to clean up the byproducts of metabolism and deal with the threat of toxins. So it's a big deal, and waste products that get stuck in a cell will cause that cell to stop doing its work, and it just simply sits there and doesn't do its work. So the vacuoles in a cell are critical in helping us get rid of toxins from a cell. So redox molecules play a key role in neutralizing toxins. The way they do this is by activating the effectiveness of antioxidants. So if you think about an antioxidant, let's say that's me, and I might have in one hand, this is a toxin. And if I'm grabbing a hold of a toxin, I need to find an antioxidant nearby. And if I can bring the two together, I will neutralize it. So antioxidants need reactive molecules to neutralize toxins. And in this case, a toxin is normally a positive charge, and reactive molecules have 2 charges. We're supposed to have a balance, but if there's not enough of these little reactive molecules to grab a hold of and bring together to neutralize a toxin, an antioxidant is not going to be able to do its work. It's there, it's in abundance, but it doesn't have its toolbox of little tiny reactive molecules that it might need. Communication or talking is a big deal for us human beings. And so that's the T, our last little component. And the nucleus and the cell membrane are critical in this. So cells talk to one another. There's an amazing amount of chatter and communication going on. And in a tissue, cells will actually send messages back to each other with these little molecules, these redox signaling molecules. And the signal will say, well, you're looking pretty bad. You need to get busy with repairing yourself. Or it might say, you're in big trouble. You need to just replicate yourself and replace yourself. Or the message might be from a nearby cell, you're so bad, you're causing trouble for our tissue. Get out of the way. We're going to find another cell to replicate and fill in your spot. So these constant decisions and communication about those decisions is critical to the health of a tissue. If this communication is not happening, your body will probably suffer serious consequences, because if a cell is out of balance and very sick and aberrant, it might start to replicate itself, and before you know it, you've got a tumor. So redox molecules are literally the messengers that are critical to communication. If I was to step on a thorn, the first thing to happen is a signal from my immune system. It's called an oxidative burst, and it will send out a signal saying there's a thorn, send out the troops, and that oxidative burst is actually a release of reactive molecules that we don't have them, we don't get the message out, we don't deal with the problem that might be happening. I want to spend a minute talking about the transcription of genes. It's a big topic today in our life. We talk a lot about nutrigenomics and the human genome, and it's everywhere. So we happen to code for about 20,000 genes that do specific coding for the production of proteins. There's a lot of other genes out there, but there's 20,000 that code for proteins, and they're very important. So what is this transcription really like? Well, think of a DNA segment. And if the DNA has to copy itself, it has to go to the copy room. And in the copy room, it's going to take a photocopy, and that photocopy is called mRNA. So that's step one. Now, the copy machine in the copy room is going to run fast or slow according to the presence of certain transcription factors. If we have a upregulation of transcription factor, it's going to happen fast. If there's not much transcription factor, the copy machine runs slowly. And that is the influence of redox biology. So we can upregulate transcription factor and code for certain DNA that we really want to be active, like a DNA that will help us adapt, or we may want to not have a DNA expressed. So 95% of our genetic material is subject to expression. Only 5% of our DNA is fixed. So most every important gene that we have, even genes that code for heart disease, are subject to switching according to the presence of transcription factor, and that is driven by redox chemistry. So then after we've got this copy room that's finished making a whole bunch of copies, we have a collection of papers. This big collection then it's all stacked up, and it represents what's called a transcriptome. And so that's the sum total of everything that's been copied. So we might have a transcript for bones, a transcript for brain cells, or something for muscle cells, and all collectively, these would be called a transcriptome. So there's a whole bunch of different transcripts that equals a transcriptome. So to sort of summarize, the mRNA leaves the copy center, goes to the ribosome house in a cell, remember the ribosomes, and the mRNA is coded into certain amino acid chains in the ribosome house. And that's where they form these giant protein molecules. And these proteins then will express our genetic potential. So when we code for certain proteins, we'll have better digestive health. We code for other proteins, we won't. And every aspect of our health is influenced by all this copying. And what drives the speed of the copy machine is our very redox molecules. It will either upregulate or not upregulate transcription factor. Well, getting back to our job in communication, we have, as people, we have a job as being social creatures. We interact with others, and without that interaction, we just don't have much joy. So our thoughts, just like in our cells, can create beliefs, and if we think them over and over, those beliefs can create deep feelings, and these are usually led to a feeling or an impulse to take action. So if you can change your thoughts, you can change your actions. But all of this is critical in our lives, just like it is in a cellular life. And just as cells listen to one another to understand exactly how we're doing, we get feedback from our nearby cells. Our lives are influenced probably most greatly when we simply listen. And so when we have interaction with people, we live longer. Proper social interactions can extend life by way more than 10%. So REACT represents an acronym of how our cells adapt and adjust. And at the core of what's going on with these cells is these very delicate but easily influenced redox reactions. And these redox molecules even influence the expression of our DNA and help us adapt. As was mentioned earlier by the Kotters, I have a website that kind of helps people learn about redox chemistry. It's one of my passions. And feel free to visit theredoxdoc.com. There's a bunch of newsletters that I try to get out as often as possible, and there's a subscription video course series as well. I'll also mention the book that they talked about. This is a nice little summary, and it goes through a number of health issues, as well as just describing the basics of redox biology. So I hope that's been helpful, and I'm very much open to questions tonight that might be on people's minds. I know that there were some questions that were sent in, and so maybe we can go to that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ward. That was extremely informative, and we really appreciate you running through that, because I was curious as to how these stabilized molecules found you. And I was reading that in 2010, you were away on vacation in Kentucky. A friend of yours sent you a case of ASEA, and when you returned home, it was rock solid frozen. So you opened the box and you were curious about the science behind it, because you found that it was not sensitive to extreme heat or extreme cold. So that then led you into reading Dr. Gary Samuelson's book, The Atomic Medical Physicist Who Stabilized These Molecules. And you were really interested in the molecular biology, I guess, behind that. And so it was just fascinating to know that that adventure in that beginning really led you to getting back into marathon running, where you did a jig in the kitchen the day after you ran a marathon because you felt so good from your recovery, and you haven't stopped taking the molecules ever since. And that was, 8 years ago now. So if you'd like to explain that story or share any more insights, I think that'd be really helpful.
Well, okay, so I'll kind of switch to talk a little bit about the ASEA technology. And so it is the only source that I know of on Earth where you can actually find balanced redox molecules for consumption. And so I was fascinated with this science, and all of this biochemistry evolved way underneath my radar as a practicing physician. But as I looked into this, it kind of made sense. And I was quite interested in trying it. And I have some sports injuries from my high school days, and joints that hurt, and they've been hurting for years, and they stopped hurting, and I could run. And it was remarkable. I mean, I've done a lot of things to help these sore joints, and I'd had some results, but I hadn't gotten deep enough in that physiological process to just activate that full potential. So yeah, these joints still have challenges, but they don't hurt, and they're not falling apart as I continue to be active and participating in backpacking trips and running and stuff like that.
I do know that you use these molecules in your practice. So I'm curious how you approach that in terms of, you know, when you use them and the results that you've been getting from using them.
Okay. Okay, so my work primarily is in the area of functional medicine. So my job is to look for clues as to what's going wrong in people's physiology, kind of deep in their physiology. People come to me knowing they're not well, but usually not yet having a disease. So they're out of balance in some way. So my job is to put on my thinking cap, do a few tests, and figure out where they're out of balance physiologically. Maybe there's some adrenal stress, hormonal imbalances, gut imbalance is a common thing. It's very common. And so as I try to pull these pieces together and restore balance by providing resources to the body, one of the key resources are these molecules. And not everybody is interested, okay, because it's kind of a different thing. But for those people who are, my work is made easy. They get better more easily with a shorter period of time. And that has a way of saving them financial resources. And so for those that have a mind for this sort of science and just kind of fascinated with what might be possible for their health, they'll take to this. And as they do, my work with other, you know, nutrients, hormones, bioidentical things is much easier.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks for sharing that with us, because the next question that we've had put to us is, are there any health conditions or challenges in particular that you would not use these molecules for?
No, because here's the way to think of this. These molecules are native to our body. We're not taking a supplement that comes from somewhere in nature. They're actually normally made inside ourselves. So when we consume a balanced source of these molecules, our body goes, wow, there's me. There's some of me. There's more of me. I'm so happy to have these molecules back. And it knows what to do with them. So whatever stressor we're dealing with physiologically, when you get to the headwaters, so to speak, of where our body is operating physiologically, everything kind of downstream from redox chemistry will be enhanced. And the other beautiful thing is that as our body is seeking to work together, our different, our adrenal system and our pituitary and the structure of our body, other functions, when the body's trying to kind of pull it all together and work in a synergistic way, when there's proper communication, everything works so much easier. So I've not yet found a condition that would be contraindicated. I know of no certain medication that would be not allowed to be taken in conjunction with something as basic as redox molecules.
So essentially what I'm hearing is safety. These molecules are safe.
Yeah. And it is remarkably safe. I know of no adverse reactions. If it's something from nature, you could be allergic because it's a foreign substance. This is not foreign. It's native and it's unique. One of the ways that I have experienced this, to know that it's a native supplement, is the flavor. The flavor of this product varies from person to person, your experience. And so after you've been taking it a while, my experience is that the flavor becomes kind of bland, where in the beginning it might be more pungent, okay? So as it becomes more bland, it's an indication that my body is more in balance. So what's happened on occasion, I picked up a germ from grandkids or from somebody at the office, and when I get sick or ill and I have a fever, the flavor goes back to really strong. Now, the product didn't change, but my ability to perceive the difference between the balance in the product and my imbalance in my body is recognized by my olfactory cells in my brain and my nose. And so as soon as my fever breaks, the flavor goes back to bland again. That could only happen with a native health supplement. It would be impossible to come from some other kind of product. So that's kind of how you know it's just part of you.
I know I was reading when you first tasted the molecules, you had said that it was exactly as you imagined it would be when it comes to cracking open a cell and just like a lemon squeezing the contents of the cell into a glass as well. So I know that definitely didn't surprise you in the beginning because of your knowledge already about the body, biochemistry, etc. So that was a really great suggestion because obviously a lot of people don't like the taste and a lot of people don't notice it. So thanks for the description there. There are some people who have intolerances to salt. So how would you handle those patients or this question?
Okay, so the manufacturing process for this product is fascinating. It's basically made from very, very pure water and very, very, very pure salt. So that it's H2O and sodium chloride, NaCl. And so as these are combined, it is then passed through a process that breaks apart the molecules into individual atoms. So there's sodium atoms and chloride atoms and hydrogen atoms and oxygen atoms that are floating around. And then they recombine into new configurations of molecules called redox molecules. So there might be 2 oxygens or 2 hydrogens and 2 oxygens, things like that. And so what is interesting is that when we consume this product, it is stable. It's remarkable that it could even be stabilized. And when we consume it, it has a way of staying in balance long enough for it to reach the part of the body that needs the molecules. Now, they do that by creating a matrix, so to speak. And part of the matrix is the presence of a little bit of sodium. And so the amount of sodium is minute. In 4 ounces, there's about the same amount of sodium as you'd find in a slice of bread. So people that are on restricted sodium diets and things like that need not worry. They're not going to be drinking enough to matter. If your doctor allows you to have a piece of bread or 2 a day, you're good to go. So it's very tiny amounts. And it doesn't lead to any problems with our health at all. It's just there to keep it stable. So it has a long shelf life.
Right. And I mean, it's amazing really how stable it is given how bioactive it is in the body. And we've been chatting about consumption. Are there other ways to apply the molecules?
Well, there is a product that you can put on your skin. And it has a little gel that allows it to be able to place the redox molecules on our skin. We absorb it that way as well. And it's remarkable how well our skin is a conveyor of redox molecules. Our skin is very hydrophilic. It loves water, doesn't love oil. And so it just soaks up the water, and the redox molecules that are have different names are very much like water, and it just soaks it up. And so the skin cells and the internal tissues will take advantage of those molecules because they'll reach sometimes great distances just from topical applications.
Well, we heard the one claim that Dan Doyle made earlier, that he's more attractive now.
He's no longer ugly.
Yeah, so we know that that's definitely from the application of these molecules. Salt and water does not do that alone.
Yeah,
so,
that's right.
So you probably hear this question a lot, and it comes down to dosage requirements. Mm-hmm. So as a medical doctor, in terms of how do you monitor that, and what sort of recommendations do you give to your patients that you can offer as advice to the health practitioners?
One of those might reflect the age of the person, but also just what state of health that they're in too. What would you say?
Okay. So here's what happens. When we I mean, remember, this is a consumer health aid. We don't really dose it, and it doesn't require a specific dosing necessarily. Many times people have an intuition about what to take, but it boils down to this. If your body is well hydrated, if you've got plenty of moisture in your body, then as you are given this new resource of balanced redox molecules, your body will then make some decisions. And it says, okay, to-do list, check 1, check 2, check 3. And it starts going through a checklist of things it wants to work on. And the repair process will begin. Your capacity to do repair work is determined by your nutritional status. It's determined by the age of your body, you know, how old you are. It's driven by how thirsty your body is for balance. And it's the opposite of the medical field. When I think of a conventional treatment for somebody with pneumonia, they're going to if they're really sick, they need massive doses of medicine, right? Because they're super sick, they need massive doses. When people are deficient in health and they are lacking redox balance, their redox potential is very low. It doesn't take much of any amount of the ASEA product for them to feel a replenishment. It's kind of like the guy in the desert who just needs a little ounce of water, and it's all of a sudden he's rejuvenated. Our cells will really make use of these products, and our bodies are wise. It knows where to use them. So I like to tell people to begin with 2 or 4 ounces twice a day. Drink a lot of water to help with the cleansing process as you start to get well, and adjust up or down according to how you feel. If you're feeling a little toxic, then adjust down. If you're not feeling much change, you could adjust up a little bit until you start to notice shift. The shift is in your cellular repair. And so the symptoms of shift would be better sleep. Oh my gosh, we sleep like a baby when we have the right balance of redox potential for our brain cells that I talked about earlier. We notice that our digestion is easier. We notice that our recovery from exercise is much more efficient, and we don't get as sore. Our muscles just don't ache as much after a good hard workout. We'll notice that joints and aches and pains that we kind of all have if we've lived long enough and played hard enough are just not as tender and sore. And so we kind of can benchmark. Even mental clarity or focus is very quickly adjusted as your body starts to get the cobwebs out and detox and, you know, kind of clean up your thinking. And so those little benchmarks are helpful in recognizing your old, healthy, familiar self kind of coming back into play. And that's a challenge that we don't always recognize. And so as we share this with people, it's kind of fun to be sure and kind of benchmark where people are at, and it helps to recognize progress.
Well, I know you've mentioned the detox aspect, which is great, because I know a lot of people, you know, ask that from time to time, and it's usually never severe at all. So your experience being that's fairly gentle, and yet hydration factors in to that, and obviously the overall state of health. You did touch on in your presentation, no contraindications to medicines, etc. But with the audience we have online today, is there any suggestions for people teetering off their medications, being more observant as to what's happening physiologically to themselves when they're on medications, as well as taking a ASEA supplement, for example?
So here's what I recommend to people: is not to play doctor, and because it gets really complicated, right? And so when I have somebody who's working with an oncologist or a cardiologist or whatever, I'll tell them, look, when you see Dr. X, I want you to be sure and mention that you're doing a number of things to promote your health, and that you know the doctor is working very diligently on your disease. And so as you have a stronger health, you may want to remind your doctor that you're getting healthier, and you'd love to see if things haven't changed a bit. And so the doctor has certain biomarkers he might be following. It might be your LDL cholesterol level. It might be a SED rate. It might be something else. And so as your markers for the process of recovery from a disease condition improve, then the doctor will say, well, isn't that interesting? That's not supposed to happen. Maybe we should rethink this. And your next comment should be, well, maybe we can cut down on some of the treatment I'm getting so that my body can just move forward on its own. So it's a step. I think that we just, as we begin something new, like the ASEA product in your life, you want to keep as many variables fixed as possible at first. Don't change too many things at once. Just add one new thing, benchmark your progress, and then as you see markers improve and you just generally feel better, talk with your doc and suggest that you retest and consider less therapy. If your blood pressure's better, you may not need that medicine. And it's gonna be hard for the medical doctor to understand this because they're not used to it. They're not used to seeing people improve their health. They're used to just doing kind of disease maintenance. So you got to help the doctor along. And it's kind of what I suggest. We shouldn't just stop medicines. That can sometimes backfire. Do it with your doctor's advice.
That's great advice. Thank you. And I noticed that you said from a patient perspective, it's important for people to really benchmark themselves.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's extremely helpful. I'm going to go over to the chat box now. There's a couple of questions that have been submitted. The first one I know was on organ transplants, acceptance versus rejection with these molecules.
I've never encountered any problems when people are drinking the ASEA product and working closely with their doctor, regardless of what sort of therapeutics they might be engaged with. Drinking molecules that are native to your body are not going to interfere with any medical therapy. Medical therapies are designed to cause your body to do stuff. And there's no discussion. Your body's going to do what is being directed by a medical therapy. It's not up for conversation. But what you're doing with redox molecules is no different than what you're doing with eating food. Or drinking water. It's as basic as that. And so you don't have to worry about it like doing something crazy to your body. Your body will never do anything that is damaging or detrimental. Medications can, because it's a forced imposition on your physiology. And so that's why doctors are sometimes doing very dangerous things with patients. They monitor stuff and make sure you're not going to have a backfire or a side effect. But think of redox molecules as some of the most basic things in life for you. They're native to your body. You're normally making them. And for the same reason we need water, because we're 70% water, we need redox molecules because we don't always make them in abundance because we're out of whack or out of balance. And so just supplementing them isn't going to throw anything off. It's just part of who you are and what you need to operate with a positive or good redox potential.
Thank you. The next question is regarding a patient with ringworm and ASEA, because it's mentioned that it's obviously a multicellular organism, which is extremely hard to shift naturally, so without chemicals or creams. So the question is, how long would it take in a situation such as this?
Well, that's a great question. It depends on the clinical situation. So a fungus is going to take over the skin for various reasons. And one of those reasons may be that there's not a balance of bacteria to compete with the presence of the fungus. So there's a deficiency of balance already present, perhaps. So if the conditions are right, we oftentimes see that these little molecules can assist in restoring the right kind of microbiota that live in and on our skin. Just as the same way the microbiota that live in our digestive tract is so critical, all right? And so the presence of the right balance is driven by our food intake. And what's interesting is that when our gut is okay, so is our airway, our mouth, and our skin. They all kind of share the similar germs environment. So you got to take care of the whole picture. It's not just a focused therapy. many times we think allopathically. You have high blood pressure. Well, you need a high blood pressure pill. That's an allopath approach. But when I think of skin conditions, it isn't just like, well, you need to do this then. It's like, well, what led to that skin condition? What's wrong with the balance of things? And maybe that's where we should work first, and then maybe create some symptomatic improvement. The application of ASEA topically is absolutely soothing and restorative to the skin. It feels so good. And there's nothing wrong with that. But at the heart of the matter, at the root of that fungal infection, a yeast or whatever it might be, then you may want to go a little deeper and look for what led to that. And then you get a real result. Long answer to a short question, sorry.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. We have a question that's come in terms of success for you treating potentially patients with Alzheimer's, particularly YOD. So I know we're naming conditions as such, but what's been your experience with ASEA with these molecules and Alzheimer's disease?
Well, I need to be careful not to really refer to a specific disease in conjunction with the ASEA product, because it's making a claim that is really not fair. All right, but if you think about cognitive decline, okay, of whatever kind. So we have people today, we have kids that are not able to focus in school, and their cognition is impaired. We have adults that are so stressed out and are so sleep deprived that they're falling asleep at the wheel or cannot think and remember nouns at work. And then we have people who are older who are experiencing cognitive decline at a alarming young age, really, that is not reversible. Okay, so cognitive decline is essentially brain cells that are not able to produce the right neurotransmitters to send a message to the next nerve cell. So it's a failure to communicate. All right, and that can happen because of a list of problems that are wrong in the body. But I will tell you that at the heart of the matter of communication in our nervous system, as was in my presentation earlier, is the very production of neurotransmitter chemicals and the transmission and recycling of those chemicals. All of that is driven foundationally by redox chemistry. It's at the core of every thought we have. And so providing a resource and balance is critical. Yes, these molecules can travel right across our blood-brain barrier, but so can toxins that come from those cytokines in our gut. So we got to be careful. It's not about just this for that. It's a more of we have to look at ourselves as a system. And oftentimes, some of the first places I witness people to experience a benefit from drinking ASEA is in their cognitive changes. They notice their mood is better. They notice they're thinking, their anxiety is less. And this can happen within seconds of consuming just an ounce of ASEA. They just notice that they're thinking better. And I've even witnessed that from people applying the topical product, the Renew product, to their face. Where does the drainage, the veins and lymph ducts from our face goes directly to our brain. That's why an infection in your sinuses can really be damaging to your brain if you're not careful. So anyway, cognition is greatly impacted by redox chemistry. And when we have a balance in our redox potential, we really help in the production and the recycling of our neurotransmitters, the very chemicals we think with.
Thank you. I know as I cycle through some of these questions, there'll be a lot that contain people wanting to know experiences with specific medical conditions. So to extrapolate what you just said in terms of the answer. When it comes to cells being involved, these molecules are going to have an impact. So
Yeah.
I'd like to go to the questions where it has, this next one I'll just read word for word. If the cellular redox potential is basically the body's ability to deal with stress, oxidation, and antioxidants, can we create disease inadvertently by making lazy cells without enough hermetic stressors by supplementing prophylactically?
Great question. And that required a good deal of thought. Can you create a weakened state, or is there a feedback loop that exists where if we're providing these redox molecules, our body's not going to generate them on their own, right? So the answer, it's impossible. And the reason why is this: our body will never, ever be influenced through the presence of some external source of redox molecule supplementation. The reason is because of where they come from. These molecules are made in the mitochondria, and they're created in the mitochondria in some cells, 1 million redox molecules a second. 1 million molecules a second in some cells. And then they get used immediately 1 million times a second. It is such turnover, all right? Well, how does this happen? It has to do with our mitochondria. So if we ever were to stop creating energy, we would die. So we're never going to stop making redox molecules because they're simply a product of creating ATP. Are we ever going to stop making ATP? Never. So just because you're drinking plenty of ASEA and have this wonderful redox potential doesn't mean you're not going to be creating an abundance of your own. Well, what if you get too many in your body? What happens? They get reconverted back into good old saline, and our body's loaded with saline. So you don't have to worry about overconsumption, and you might worry about underconsumption if you really need these molecules. And my experience has been people have an intuition about this, and they're drawn to these little molecules. So are animals. Animals are not afraid to drink this. They love it, and they know it's kind of an instinct that it's good.
We've definitely had that experience at our place.
You can't get lazy production of redox chemistry through a negative feedback loop. Doesn't exist. So we're good.
Perfect. Thank you. The next question is about oxidative stress typically leading to chronic illnesses. And they'd like to know, are there any long or short-term studies that have been done with primary or secondary outcomes?
There are thousands of those studies. I would refer you to my website. I've annotated several of those. If you just go to the section that talks about oxidative stress, there's several articles that are referenced. And in my video conference series, there's several that are referenced talking just specifically about oxidative stress. It's been a hot topic for at least 10 years, at least, maybe more like 15. And it's been studied in a variety of environments, from animals to plants, backwards and forwards. And the outcomes are astonishing when you analyze the impact of oxidative stress and the detrimental effect it has on physiological outcomes. So when we can promote a better redox potential, and in most of the studies, it's all about like antioxidant function, right? And when we have the presence of antioxidants taking care of our cells, the question is, what's going to cause the nucleus to produce more antioxidants? It's all driven by transcription factor and this coding of genes and replication. All of that is upregulated by the presence of a balanced resource of redox molecules. So if somehow we can preserve that in our cells, then we preserve our ability to protect and detox. And that is integral in preventing cancer. It's integral in preventing premature aging and breakdown in our physiology.
Thanks, Dr. Ward. I know that we have another schedule to continue on with, and you've been so generous with your time. So my apologies to the people who have submitted questions in the chat box we haven't got to. I just wanted to ask you one last question. And for the people whose answers haven't been forthcoming, because I haven't asked the question, please get with the person who has invited you to the webinar and we'll endeavour to find the answers to your questions. So the last one is regarding homeostasis and young healthy people taking ASEA prophylactically. Will taking it reduce their own endogenous production of these redox molecules?
The answer is emphatically no. None.
Perfect.
None. And frankly, you know, I for the last 10 years have considered myself to be pretty healthy, and you know, I thought I was pretty healthy before I started ever consuming these things, these little molecules. But here's the thing: if we choose to consume these as young adults, you know, we get to choose. And what we're choosing is whether or not we want to maintain a vibrant balance or take our chances with our world today, which is not a safe place. Here's a great example. Why is it that the #1 prescription drug in most all industrialized countries like America is a thyroid supplement, Synthroid, levothyroxine, whatever it is? Why is that? 40 years ago, when I began my practice, it was not. It was number 50 or 60. It's way down the list. What's happened? We don't have more Graves' disease. We don't have more Hashimoto's disease. We've simply got thyroids that are quitting. Why are they quitting? We don't have enough iodine. It's not getting in. And the reason it's not getting in is because our world is polluted with chlorine, bromine, and fluorine, which are on the same column of the periodic table of elements. We can't assimilate enough iodine to keep our thyroids healthy. We just can't. And so we can try to flood our bodies with iodine, but that is not even working very well. We don't have a safe world. It is just not safe physiologically in many ways. There's a list of reasons. It's not just toxins, but so what are you going to do? Well, you could follow your mother's advice and say, well, get your rest, eat a balanced diet, exercise, and do things that are going to bring you joy and peace in life. But that isn't good enough for today's day. So I just ask people, what are they doing? What 21st century technology are you applying to your life today to promote your health? Because if you're not doing it, nobody else will. And so my response to that question is, well, I'm drinking these little redox molecules every day, and I'm doing my very best to provide this balanced resource of native redox molecules that are working at the core of my physiology. And that's my best bet. I take a number of supplements and nutrients, of course, but at the heart of the matter is this upstream, very critical physiological resource that we don't have, that we really benefit from having resources at. And it's here, it's available, and it makes a huge difference. So we're not going to hurt ourselves in drinking this as a preventive measure. In fact, it's just what your body asks for. It's as basic as water. In fact, it's safer than water because it doesn't have any impurities. Most of the water we have has a little bit of arsenic, a little bit of mercury. It's really hard to get all of it out, even with the best filtration system. So ASEA has none of that. It's clean. So there you go.